Hello and welcome to another YouTube presentation by the London Transport Museum Friends. Our speaker today is Paul Sainthouse. In his day job, Paul is Managing Director, Dawsongroup Bus and Coach. In his private life, Paul is an enthusiast and a keen supporter of the London Transport Museum through membership of its Patrons Circle. Paul's presentation is entitled My Routemaster Passion. Paul is going to explain what ignited that passion and how he became the owner of 2 preserved Routemaster buses. Before I hand over to Paul, can I just say that if you're watching this during our premiere, then please ask questions and post your thoughts using the chat function. If you're watching at a later date, leave your comments because we do welcome your feedback. So Paul, over to you.
Hello, my name is Paul Sainthouse. By day, I'm Managing Director of Dawsongroup Bus and Coach, a position I've held since 2002, and I'm also a member of the Dawsongroup PLC Advisory Board. I was born in 1967 and have a transport career spanning almost 35 years. From an operational background in distribution logistics, I joined Dawsongroup Truck and Trailer as a management trainee in 1987. I was appointed Director in 1997 and held a variety of management positions with the company, finally moving permanently into passenger vehicles in 1998. I'm currently President of CILT UK and a member of the CILT International Reference Group. I'm a Director of the Confederation of Passenger Transport, Vice Chairman of their Suppliers Committee, and both Secretary and Advisory Board Member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group of the Road Passenger Transport Industry. I'm involved in charity as a patron through the London Transport Museum and through Imbabus, an annual bus industry event. I'm also a freeman of the City of London and a liveryman of the Worshipful Company of Carmen. Finally, I'm an enthusiastic owner of 2 restored London Transport Routemasters and still proudly possess both my LGV and PCV licences. As this is quite a personal presentation, I'll start by telling you a little bit more about me. I'm from a London emigrant family who permanently moved to Buckinghamshire whilst following my father's job with John Lang, builders of the M1 motorway, and have been working in the bus and coach industry for close to 30 years, generally based in Milton Keynes. I'm a very driven and passionate individual in everything that I do, something that I hope will come across in today's presentation. So it's no surprise for those who know me that Routemasters, which were a feature of my younger years, became a passion once more. Now, many of you know far more about all things LT than me. I'm not even going to try and educate you. So this really is very much a personal perspective from one individual who simply has a passion for London and its transport system. Queensbury, the family roots. My parents and grandparents lived in the northwest London area named Queensbury from the 1930s. And whilst my parents moved further north in the mid-1960s, my grandparents in the main stayed in Queensbury. It's an area I knew incredibly well, having featured heavily in my life for at least the first 20 years, although like most areas, it has changed much in character over the last 30 years, but it is still quite an interesting place. It was built almost entirely on greenfield land and that of the Stag Lane Aerodrome, previously home to de Havilland. I was amazed recently to stumble across a photograph of the area during construction, which I share with you now. As you can see, the underground station was the focal centre of the area, with Queensbury Circle to this day being dominated by the roundel structure, as you can see in the photographs. It was done in such a way that it could be seen from every approach road and was clearly very much an emphasised feature of living in this new residential area. The actual name Queensbury was adopted as a result of a Sunday newspaper competition of all things, but it's an area that I remember incredibly well. Something that isn't featured there now, but was also strong in my memory, was both an air raid siren that sat next to the roundel on a very tall pole and was there right through until the late 1970s. It must have been effective, but there was still impact because just around the corner was also a very large bomb site that I remember walking past for many years until finally flats were built on it. But certainly the crater was there for a good 30 or 40 years after the Second World War. Stanley Epperin, my grandfather, who I would like to introduce to you now. His true profession was as a ship's captain, sailing oil tankers from Aruba in the Caribbean for Esso. But upon return from abroad, he found his work with London Transport. He was first a conductor and then an inspector, and worked from Edgware and Cricklewood. I remember as a small boy seeing him in Burnt Oak, standing on the A5 junction in full inspector's uniform with his trench coat. As you can see, I still have his conductor's badge and his 1956 Union card, but we don't actually have a photograph of my grandfather in his London Transport uniform, which is a great shame, really. Again, it's a commanding memory and something that really has influenced me, I think, throughout my life. And here you see me with my brother, John, in my grandparents' garden in the early 1970s, resplendent in our no doubt misappropriated London Transport caps. As you can see, we were being drawn in at an early age. Those caps were regularly brought out from under the stairs, and all sorts of imaginary games played with those. And again, I'm sure that's something that must have bored into my psyche very early on. Some of my earliest memories are being on buses in northwest London. A trip to the RAF Museum at Hendon was always a favourite when we were staying with our grandparents, and actually somewhere I still like to visit now. Certain aspects of it have hardly changed at all in all of those years, and a lot of the features I would recognise from those days. Something that has very positive connotations and memories for me. But in those early years, as travelling on buses, I firstly always remember the smell. All London Transport buses had a smell. And the last time I smelt it, I think, was in the 1990s in a Reeves Ashgrove garage. It must have been some kind of cleaning fluid, I guess, as it certainly wasn't part of the fabric of the vehicles. And it was very distinctive. It comes from a world where things still smelt of something, very much unlike they do today in such a sanitised environment in which we live. Another memory, as it is to so many people, was the rasp of the Gibson A14 ticket machine and the ticket I was handed by the conductor. I now own two of these machines, and everyone who experiences them still finds them exciting. I like to think anyway. Being handed a printed London Transport ticket from the machine is always a treat. It's something that you often find people pop in their pockets as a souvenir. Interestingly, tickets were also, as part of my family, something that my father collected in his younger years, and we still have a box of his collected bus tickets. So there was something running through the veins of our family with buses, and I like to think I'm just maintaining that legacy. Now, when we travel on buses, we all have a favourite seats. Top deck front, maybe. Top deck rear. Mine was behind the driver, so you could see through into the cab. There was what seemed to be a lot happening to watch, with the driver orchestrating all of the controls as he weaved in and out of the stops. But my absolute fascination was with the red CAV trafficator control. I remember watching him turn the top, wondering what on earth it did, as obviously I knew nothing about driving, but it looked really important to the single-digit aged me. And for some reason that memory very firmly stuck, and the red trafficator cap is still essential in all of my buses. RM1400, even having the self-cancelling feature still operational. Whenever I'm looking to restore the buses, I spend hours making sure that we can actually provide a CAV trafficator in good condition. It really does make the vehicle look exactly as it should, in my opinion. Well, my youth was over. Life takes over. The years pass by. Memories of days spent in North London fade, and everyday life, and in particular work, takes over. The years simply roll by, far too quickly, in fact. Then, totally unexpectedly, in 1995, I ended up looking after the new bus and coach business for Dawsongroup. And by mid-2000s, we'd grown it significantly to over 2,000 vehicles. As part of that, we started supplying buses to many of the new entrant operating companies in the London marketplace, and London started playing a role in my life once more. They were great days when the London marketplace was opening up. I think there was 31 or 32 operators, and some of them, with hindsight, probably shouldn't have been running London bus operations, but in reality it served the purpose of providing competition, which is something that was keen to be seen to be had. So I spent a lot of time talking to peer group in London buses about the different operators, the way in which they were supporting them, the way in which we were encouraging these people into the London marketplace, and the way that as a provider we could feel fairly safe if we were providing into that particular market. And even to this day, our first experiences of providing buses into London were with characters that we still deal with nowadays, and still continue to be a joy. We were important players in the bus industry, and I attended a CBT evening event, as part of which we were relocated by Arriva for dinner in one of their heritage Routemasters. I sat downstairs, naturally, and in that split second all of those memories came flooding back. As I watched the pavement fly by from the rear bench, those fateful words, "We should have one of these," were uttered. So it really was a CBT and Arriva's fault to some extent from that point on. I'd like to change the topic for a minute and talk about London. Let's talk London. I love social history, I love architecture, and I love London. I love the Routemaster as it epitomises all of these things. Let me talk a little bit about each. We all know the history of the trolley bus replacement programme, of which 597 was part. I'm not going to bore you with the garage allocations, etc. You can find that out yourself if you don't already know. I do want you to imagine London at the time, its people, their lives and their needs. A very different world from today in many ways, but buses played an important part to every Londoner. And almost everyone has an emotional tie to them somewhere. The Routemaster was perfect for the area in which it began service, and a regular form of transport for so many still non-car owners. London's architecture is stunning, there's no argument about that. And if you take your time, look up from the pavement and see what our predecessors and contemporaries have done to create a unique environment, it truly is a thing of wonder. And London has a character all of its own. It's not just a look, it's a unique feeling that you get when you enter. It exists anywhere within the confines of the city. I can't actually explain it, I can't put into words the feeling that you get, but you'll know what I'm talking about, I'm sure. It's that London feeling. And within this wonderful environment is the street architecture of the bus network. The buses must complement the city itself. They're part of the panoramic architecture. They need to look perfect outside stunning Georgian and Victorian monuments, exactly as they must look outside very modernist high-rise parts of the city. And Routemasters do this. They fit. They look right. They complement. They add to their surroundings. And they appear to have a very friendly character. They smile at you almost. This is a wonderful designer's outcome. And that is what they aim for so often, but so rarely deliver. The undisputed classic design. Right, let's talk RM597. Fast forward, and now to the beginning of the last decade. I still had no Routemaster, but the urge was growing, and to cut a very long story short, I became the owner of a very sad-looking RM597. The bus had been quite well known in the early 2000s in somewhat unusual livery, but had been sold, parked on a farm, moved outside, and left to deteriorate. I had, at that time, told the Newmans I was looking for an RM, and by chance 597 ended up heading to them for sale. I had first refusal, and the deal was done unseen, including a quick repaint to get us going. Now, I'm not sure if it was salesmanship, but Peter Newman told me that the guys in their workshop had said that it was a really good bus and they should keep it. But Peter had said no, they had enough Routemaster already. If this is true, I'm glad he did decide to let it go, because they were right. It was, and still is, a really good bus. Okay, so we own a Routemaster, and it has an AV590 engine and tungsten lighting. Great. And upon inspection, it's remarkably sound, and being of an early release, remarkably original. Let's get on with sorting it out. And this is where my personality traits cause me some headaches. I'm very fortunate to have on our team an LT apprentice fleet engineer, Stuart Mulberry, and so we're able to do a very good appraisal. All the usual issues you expect from standing: brakes, gaskets, accumulators, fuel pump, oil and fluids, all needed to be taken care of. And we also discovered that we had very little metal behind the side and tail light lenses, and we needed to find some replacements for those. And this is how it starts. And whilst you're doing the lights, you might as well do. And so the fun began. It's 18 months later that we're close to our maiden voyage. In between times, there's been a huge amount of enjoyment, and probably the starting point of what has since become my Routemaster passion. The years have been unkind. Storage issues often lead to neglect, and unfortunately RM597 suffered in this way. But under the surface was a great bus waiting to be rediscovered. I used to joke that it was the most environmentally friendly London bus there was. Firstly, after 25 years of continuous service, it had been recycled far more than once. It was giving out no harmful emissions, or any substances at all, as the engine never ran. And of course, the paintwork was capable of photosynthesizing. It was that thick with green algae. It deserved better though, and in that moment it became my role to ensure that RM597 was good for another 50 years at least. This bus was definitely going to see me out. So, whilst you're doing the lights, you might as well do everything. New paint internally and externally, new Rexy, new Treadmaster flooring throughout, new maquette, all the alloy inspected and reconditioned, new labels, new marking, the list goes on and on. But hey, you're only going to do it once, right? So you might as well do it right. That's what I thought anyway. But doing this does throw up some interesting things. During the restoration, we removed our M597 staircase, and trapped therein were coins, these shillings in fact. Now, I find this fascinating. I imagine the moment where somebody dropped their change and it disappeared down the gap. I imagine how annoyed they would have been. And what if that had been their only fare? One of those shillings is from 1948 and could have conceivably been lost very early in 597's life. That coin could have potentially travelled 1 million miles. Now it's finally free and it's sitting in my study. Its adventure over. I do actually feel that it is my duty to put it back in there one day and allow it to continue its journey with RM597. It almost becomes part of the fabric of the bus. But for the time being, I think it enjoys its freedom. It is interesting what you find as you work through these buses and the things that have been trapped behind. We've also discovered a certain amount of repairers' graffiti behind panels that give an indication of who worked on what and when. Certainly some of the refurbishment work you can identify, and some of the defurbishment work that we've subsequently done has revealed all sorts of bits of history of the vehicle. So the coins are part of it, but there's so much more as well. So RM597 really was a labour of love, and I think it turned out pretty well looking at the photographs. Nowadays, it gets much attention, it gets plenty of interest, including from those who point out that, it didn't have a rivet there when it was new, to which I point out that it's not actually pretending to be an early 1960s bus at all. It's representing a 1985 bus that was put into 1960s livery for the sightseeing duties. And yes, we did leave the ordinary installed PA system and sliding driver saloon window in. And yes, the automatic drive is disabled, just like all of the sightseeing buses were, because that's exactly what it is. And at this point, I would mention its 60th birthday is on the 1st of February 2021. Hope I will look as fresh as this at 60, and know that I'll still be around at my centenary. RM597 will be, I'm confident of that. So, RM597 is quite a special bus, but let's talk about what makes it extra special. Well, initially nothing really, not for the first 24 years anyway. It just did the job it was built for. But come the mid-1980s, fame beckoned, with the previously mentioned London Coaches relaunch of the original London Transport Sightseeing Tour. RM597 was allocated with 49 other RMs, of which were going to be refurbished to early London Transport RM livery, with the PA fitted and special posts and blinds. RM597 was the first to be completed at Aldenham, this being the last batch of vehicles to be completed there, I believe, and went on to become the poster bus for the launch of the new operation. It may well have been famous for just 15 minutes, but by 1986, RM597 had been passed to the London bus sales for disposal, having been replaced with an open-top variety that had been bought in from Liverpool. However, in 1986, London Bus Sales commissioned a short film to promote the RM to other marketplaces and hired Star Trek's Lieutenant Sulu, actor George Takei, to star in and narrate in the production. At the end of the film, George declares that a test ride is needed, and is seen driving through and then out of shot and off into the distance in RM597. The bus had been driven by the pilot of the USS Enterprise. I'm extremely proud of that. That really is quite special. If you've never seen the film on YouTube, I really would recommend checking it out. And that could have been so easily the end of the story had it not ended up being sold by London Bus Sales to Loughborough University Students' Union, who travelled the country in it raising funds for MenCap. RM597 was not only their transport, but it was also their advertisement as well as their hotel. And one of those students was Tanny Gray-Thompson, the Paralympian, of course now Baroness Gray-Thompson, who joined them on outings on one or more occasions. The driver, who I met in 2016, seemed to recall that she got absolutely no help at all from the other students, boarding or alighting. More recently, and somewhat bored of taking our newest vehicles to the annual CPT Ride and Drive event in North Weald, we decided to take RM507. At least it would act as a balance for all the latest models on display there, and it generated much interest, not least from Lord Snape, who was CPT Guest of Honour. In fact, he took it for a spin around the airfield, at which time we discovered he was not only the head of National Express at one point, but also did hold a full PCV licence many years ago, although in reality he was actually a railwayman. Lastly, RM597, starred in a print by Mike Swift, referencing Imbabus, the image shared with RML 2375 belonging to Sabita Hendy. It does seem that this bus certainly likes a bit of public attention. Okay, let's talk RM1400. Less of a star, and extremely camera shy it seems, but still a wonderful bus. As you can see from the brilliant photographs at Westminster Abbey in the National Gallery, when the area was still actually a highway. Scania Ranger by London Central in the 1990s, plus eyes down maquette, and with hopper windows added. They also kindly sold off the registration number, which is now displayed on a Ford Mustang, a 1969 Ford Mustang, so at least it's contemporary. I love the picture of RM1400 with Westminster Abbey, as it actually reminds me just how dirty London was at that point. I think the way in which London attempted to clean its air was through the airways of all of the pedestrians walking around, because you certainly knew you'd been in town when you used the tissue when you got home. As sometimes happens, people know all about your interests. And a colleague said to me one day, "There's a guy up the road, that's one of those buses you like, in his garden." "Oh, really?" I said casually, and tried to ignore what I was being told. And before you know where I am, I'm standing in the bus. The garden actually belongs to a £4 million plus Georgian mansion, covering numerous acres. But sure enough, RM1400 is next to a barn close to the house. The owner who bought it in 2004 used it for a bit of fun, and eventually it was parked up, and the weather really took its toll. Upon closer inspection, it really is in a mess. But of course, I could see the redeeming numerous features, and it deserved better. This could be a really nice bus if someone just had the time, money and effort to put into it. And somehow, a couple of weeks later, it came home with me. And back we go. And whilst you're doing the lights, what I would say with both buses is that once you get under the surface, they really are in great structural order. And under all of the panels, they are still like new. A real testament to those who designed and built those. They really are amazing creations. It was all worth it. Nowadays, RM597 and RM1400 lead a charmed existence. Fully operational with Class 6 tests, we take them on occasional outings, we do some shows, participate in Imbabus as we've mentioned, and let them out for an occasional run out, just because we can. It's a great life really, they're leading. They have worked hard in their lives, but now they have a very well-earned luxury retirement. Let's talk interesting challenges. I love a challenge. I'm not a technician by any stretch of the imagination, but what I am is determined, creative in particular. And on occasion, I give life back to Routemasters. During the restoration, from a pretty poor start I have to say, I've all toured a bit of my Routemasters. Nothing fires me up more than somebody saying, "You'll never find one of those, not seen one of those in years." The challenge with the detective work that leads you to your goal, and then the final close-in on the prize. Oh, and of course, when you arrive back with a part that you needed and were told you would never obtain. So far I've never failed, although sometimes it has taken me to extremes, including, as you see on the side, the picture of the AV690 engine, which was retrieved from Switzerland a few months back, and is probably the furthest travelled part that I've ever been required to source. Let's talk joy. I can tell you for a fact, Routemasters bring joy to people. Not just people like us, but ordinary folk in the street. Bus users and non-bus users. Old, young, everyone. They're a leveller, and I know this, as many of you who have driven an RM in an open road recently will too. Because when you do, people look, and people smile, and people wave. It's one of the best feelings knowing that for once you've fleetingly touched somebody's day with something other than the routine. Like a small child has just seen a real old bus, just like the ones in their storybooks, with a rear platform and round edges and a driver in a half cab. Absolutely brilliant. And let's talk about those future passengers. Let's face it, kids love buses. It's an absolute fact. In their world, they're everywhere. Books, toys, clothes, even on their dinner plate. Rightly or wrongly, they're almost always red, and mostly the images generally represent a Routemaster. And that is why children and their parents are interested when we take the buses out. I've lost count of the number of photo requests we received over the years, but somehow, once the world is more realistic, and they mature slightly, and the buses they're exposed to are not like the ones they always knew when they were little, do they lose some interest. How we can keep them engaged as an adult life is a question that many people are working on now. It's something that we really need to prioritise. Let's talk charity. We are privileged to be able to use the buses to support Emma Bus, an event well covered in previous Friends meetings. Every year we send RM597 and RM1400 for a day doing the job they were designed so beautifully for, stage carriage. They were, however, perfect for relatively flat London, and I'm not sure they were designed to get up Imber Bus's Sack Hill. That one could be a bit of an adrenaline rush as you crawl up in first gear with nothing to do but listen out for the funny noises the engine are bound to make at any second. Oh, and I do hold the honour of being the only driver, as far as I know, to complete the Lavingdons loop backwards. I can still recall the faces of the other drivers as I headed towards them, and the backs of the heads of my potential passengers as they faced away from me, looking for the next bus to arrive. I would say it was very early on in my bus driving career though, and I was severely reprimanded when I got back to base. Let's talk Routemaster, people. So far, I've told you I get a lot out of interesting subject matter that goes with these buses. But ultimately, road passenger transport is provided by people for people. Routemasters were not born, they were made. And it is the vision of people, past and present, that make these buses more than just metal, cloth and rubber. The bus industry is unique in my opinion. As future Friends presenter and chair of the UK Bus Awards, Mark Exley put so well on Twitter recently, being part of the bus industry, you're part of a family. I've made some outstanding friendships during my years in passenger transport, and many of those enhanced or cemented through a shared passion for the Routemaster and other classic buses. I've also been given some great opportunities through this passion, and I include in that today being able to talk to this distinguished audience. Seen here in the Edgware Road, just north of Marble Arch, is a young RM597. The picture was actually taken 6 weeks before I was born, and what fascinates me about it could be the lack of street furniture that totally prevents us from recreating this picture. It could be the Withers car dealership in the background, an old coach builder that survived into the 1960s selling cars, but no. It's actually the lady peering out of the lower deck window, just going about her ordinary London life. What was she looking at? What was she thinking about? She has no idea that in that split second she would be immortalised, nor that 50 years later her image will be looking out of RM597's window on the office wall of the bus's future owner. It truly is an honour to own such an icon. And if you're still listening, I suspect that you already understand the many reasons for my Routemaster passion.
Thank you, Paul, for taking us on that very personal journey. It's fascinating to hear how your experiences as a youngster growing up in London ignited that Routemaster passion, which, as you rightly say, can still inspire youngsters today. I know Paul is very keen, if possible, to reunite RM1400 with its proper registration mark. So if the owner of that Ford Mustang happens to be watching, or if anyone else has any information about its whereabouts, then please get in touch via the Friends website. One further plea, if you're watching this but are not already a friend, please do think about joining us. It's a great way of supporting the museum in these still challenging times. Membership details and benefits are on the Friends website. So thank you again, Paul, for your talk, and thanks to everyone for watching. We'll be back soon with another of our at-home presentations.